Some people are studied, and some people are investigated. That's the line they whispered when your name came up, half in awe, half in panic, and entirely unsure of what exactly they were dealing with. Because here's the truth. People don't normally interview every single person you've ever met, unless they're either preparing a documentary or trying to confirm a suspicion they're too afraid to say out loud. And the funny part? After all their digging, questioning, analyzing, overthinking, cross-checking, and probably drinking too much coffee, they ended up more confused than when they started. They expected a neat file, a clear pattern, a predictable personality, something simple they could label and tuck away like, ah, yes, this is the typical introverted, extroverted, mysterious, nonchalant, charismatic enigma type. As if that category even exists. But instead, they ran into something that scrambled their expectation of human behavior. Because every person they interviewed described you with a different tone, a different memory, a different impact. Yet all of it somehow pointed to the same unsettling truth. You left marks, not fingerprints. And that's where the fear kicked in. According to research, the average person meets roughly 10,000 people in their lifetime. And apparently, you managed to leave such an imprint on enough of them that even random conversations about you turned into therapy sessions. Half of the people told stories that made you sound like a guide. The other half described you like a plot twist they still haven't recovered from. It got to a point where the interviewers had to double-check whether they were investigating a person or an unsolved mystery with a sarcastic streak. Because let's be honest, if someone tried to summarize your existence with a cute little personality chart, the chart would probably catch fire. And that's why they're scared shitless now. Not because of anything you did, but because of what they discovered. Everywhere you went, you changed something. Someone's mindset, someone's direction, someone's confidence, someone's understanding of themselves. They started their investigation expecting to solve you. Instead, they ended up confronting themselves. Welcome to the truth behind the interviews. An unsettling, fascinating, slightly humorous, and absolutely unforgettable dive into what really happens when they study every person you've ever crossed paths with. Number 1, they realized you never needed a stage to influence people. They expected to find a pattern, a loud declaration of your presence, some obvious mark that would scream power, authority, or charisma. What they discovered instead was almost terrifying in its subtlety. You didn't need to be the center of attention. You didn't need accolades, applause, or even recognition. Your influence wasn't performed. It was absorbed, internalized, and acted upon by the people around you without you even trying. Every conversation you had, every small interaction, every passing moment left a ripple in someone else's life, and by the time they realized it, the effect was already permanent. People described how, without intending to, you nudged them toward clarity, pushed them toward better choices, or forced them to see the cracks in their own thinking. They remembered moments when your words, even casual ones, landed so precisely that they couldn't ignore them. And it wasn't the kind of influence that makes someone feel indebted or controlled. It was the kind that made them look at themselves differently, made them upgrade quietly, painfully, sometimes begrudgingly. That realization hit the investigators like a punch in the gut, because influence that works silently and invisibly is far more dangerous than influence that shouts. It cannot be tracked. It cannot be predicted. It cannot be contained. They had assumed they'd see a pattern of dominance or charm, something loud enough to measure. What they found instead was a quiet authority that came from being fully yourself, consistent without being rigid, present without being intrusive. That's what scared them the most. The fact that you could change the course of someone's thoughts, habits, or even life without them ever realizing it was happening. You never asked for credit, you never needed applause, and you certainly didn't perform. And yet, everywhere you went, people were subtly, irrevocably affected. They had interviewed everyone you'd ever met, thinking it would reveal secrets about you. Instead, it revealed a truth far scarier to them. Your influence isn't in what you do. It's in the fact that you exist. And sometimes existing quietly in a way no one can control is the most powerful thing of all. Number 2, every person described you differently, yet all of them were right. When they started interviewing everyone you'd ever met, they expected consistency. They assumed they'd hear the same stories, the same impressions, the same version of you over and over. A tidy, predictable pattern they could label and store. What they found instead was chaos, but the kind that made perfect sense once you looked closer. Each person had a completely different experience with you, a unique perspective shaped by how you interacted with them, what they needed from you, or what they were ready to handle. One person described you as fiercely honest, another as impossibly kind, someone else as unnervingly perceptive, and yet another as untouchable. Every account seemed contradictory, yet none of them was wrong. The interviews revealed a truth that scared them far more than any dramatic story could. You adapt without losing yourself. You don't change who you are for anyone else, but you do reveal different pieces of yourself depending on the moment and the person. People weren't describing inconsistencies. They were describing different facets of the same force, different angles of a life lived with awareness and subtle intention. It's not something you can fake or manipulate. It's something you naturally radiate. They realized they couldn't pin you down, couldn't fit you into a neat category. They expected a formula, a profile they could study and predict. Instead, they discovered a living paradox, someone who is the same in essence, but infinitely varied in expression. That realization unsettled them because they know how the world works. Control, labels, boxes. You don't fit into any of them, and the more they tried to reconcile the conflicting stories, the more they understood there's no reconciling you. By the end of the interviews, they weren't confused because of what you said or did. They were rattled because of what you made people feel about themselves. Everyone's version of you was right, and that truth was impossible to manipulate or dismiss. It left them facing something they couldn't measure, something beyond their understanding. A presence that defies expectation, yet leaves undeniable marks on everyone it touches. That's the kind of fear that doesn't scream, it lingers, quiet, sharp, and impossible to shake. Number 3, they expected to hear flaws, but people only confessed their own. When they started talking to everyone you'd ever met, they thought they'd dig up dirt, uncover weaknesses, find some crack in your armor they could expose. They went in expecting a long list of your flaws, mistakes, regrets, something they could hold over you, or at least use to make sense of the influence you had over people. What they discovered instead completely flipped the script. Nobody talked about you the way they expected. Instead, every single conversation ended up revealing something about themselves. People admitted their own fears, their own insecurities, the things they had been hiding even from themselves. Someone would start describing a moment with you and suddenly confess how they had lied, cheated, or been too weak to act. Another would recount how your words made them rethink a decision they were ashamed of. Without trying, you had a way of making people confront their own truth, and when they did, they projected nothing but clarity and admiration onto you. They weren't seeing flaws in you. They were seeing mirrors of themselves, reflections they hadn't been ready to face. That terrified them because influence like that cannot be quantified or controlled. You weren't manipulating anyone. You weren't forcing confessions or creating drama. You weren't performing a role that could be dissected. You existed in a way that made people reveal their own weaknesses and strengths simultaneously, and it happened naturally. They realized that anyone who can make people confront themselves without trying, without threat, without reward, is operating on a level beyond ordinary comprehension. They had thought they could uncover secrets about you, but all they found were truths about others. And the fact that you triggered that without even trying made them more unsettled than any scandal could. You weren't flawed in the way they expected. You were untouchable in a way they hadn't anticipated. Every confession they recorded, every story they documented, pointed to the same conclusion. You don't expose yourself to intimidate or impress. You expose reality in a way that forces others to see themselves. And that is far more unsettling than any flaw ever could be. Number 4, they found out. You don't chase people, yet people still follow you. They expected to uncover a strategy, a method, a visible effort on your part that explained why people were drawn to you. They thought there would be some hustle, some constant pursuit, some calculated charm that kept you relevant in everyone's lives. What they found instead was the opposite, and it completely unnerved them. You don't chase, you don't beg for attention, validation, or approval. You don't manipulate, scheme, or force connections. You simply exist, and people naturally gravitate toward you. That alone left them bewildered, because the kind of influence you wield cannot be controlled or predicted. Every interview revealed a recurring pattern. People felt drawn to you even when you were distant, even when you disappeared for long stretches of time, even when they weren't sure they liked or understood you. They admitted that your absence created curiosity, your calm presence demanded respect, and your subtle actions, often unnoticed by anyone else, left lasting impressions. People followed not because they had to, not because you pressured them, but because something about your energy, your way of being, triggered recognition. Recognition that you see, understand, and influence the world without needing permission. That realization terrified them because it defies all conventional rules. In their world, influence requires effort, control, and visibility. You disproved all of it. You don't need to chase. You don't need to explain yourself. You don't need to perform tricks to keep people interested. Yet people keep showing up, keep admiring, keep being subtly changed by you. The more they probed, the more they realized they couldn't find a method, a formula, or a weakness. They could only acknowledge that your presence alone was magnetic, transformative, and untouchable. They had gone in expecting a clear path to understanding you. Instead, they discovered that your influence is quiet, effortless, and undeniable. You never needed to chase anyone because your energy, your consistency, and your authenticity naturally pulled people in, leaving those who study you scrambling to explain what cannot be explained. And that is exactly why they ended up scared shitless. Number 5, nobody could explain your confidence because it was never borrowed. When they started piecing together what people said about you, they thought confidence would be the easiest thing to dissect. They expected a recipe, achievements, accolades, validation from others, or some visible sign that explained why people were drawn to you and why you carried yourself the way you did. What they discovered instead was something that unsettled them profoundly. Your confidence wasn't borrowed from anyone or anything. It didn't come from approval, success, or external validation. It came from inside, a deep, unshakable understanding of who you are and what you stand for, and no one could imitate it, manipulate it, or take it away. People described moments when you walked into a room without trying, and yet every eye noticed you. They remembered conversations where you spoke simply and quietly, yet your presence made them listen, made them reconsider, made them feel small in comparison, but not in a threatening way. It wasn't arrogance. It was certainty. They couldn't explain it because there were no signs, no proofs, no awards or titles to point at. It was raw, natural, earned from life itself. Through the mistakes you faced, the challenges you endured, and the relentless self-reflection you practiced. Every failure, every heartbreak, every moment of doubt had been absorbed, processed, and transformed into quiet, unstoppable confidence that scared them more than any aggression ever could. They realized that someone who doesn't rely on external props to define their worth cannot be shaken, cannot be bribed, and cannot be controlled. Your confidence wasn't performative, it was intrinsic. It was visible in your calm demeanor, in the way people subconsciously gravitated toward you, and in the way they remembered you long after the interaction ended. The more they tried to rationalize it, the more elusive it became. They had interviewed everyone, collected stories, tried to analyze patterns, but nothing added up. Your confidence wasn't something they could map or replicate. It was a living proof that true power starts from knowing yourself fully and refusing to let anyone else dictate your value. And that realization left them quietly, deeply, and irreversibly shaken. Number 6, the more people spoke about you, the more they saw their own limitations. As they interviewed everyone you'd ever met, they assumed the conversations would reveal your story, your habits, your choices, maybe even your mistakes. What they didn't expect was how often those interviews turned into reflections of the people themselves. Every story about you ended up highlighting someone else's shortcomings, hesitations, and unfulfilled potential. It was almost cruel in its simplicity. You didn't need to confront anyone, criticize anyone, or even offer advice. And yet your presence in their lives forced them to confront the parts of themselves they had been avoiding. People confessed how you exposed their comfort zones without trying, how moments with you made them realize they were playing small, settling for less, or avoiding responsibility. One person admitted they had always been envious of your decisiveness. Another admitted that your calm clarity made their own indecision painfully obvious. Someone else revealed that your quiet determination highlighted their own lack of discipline. You were like a mirror, but not the flattering kind, the kind that refuses to lie. The investigators didn't anticipate this effect. They went in thinking they would uncover your secrets, expecting flaws or weaknesses to appear through others' accounts. Instead, they found an unsettling pattern. Wherever you went, people weren't just remembering you, they were remembering what they weren't, what they hadn't achieved, and what they feared they never would. It wasn't manipulation, it was simply the natural byproduct of your presence, your clarity, and your unwillingness to compromise your standards. That realization left them shaken because they realized they were dealing with someone whose impact couldn't be measured by traditional metrics. You didn't dominate, intimidate, or coerce. You revealed, subtly but irrevocably. And the more they tried to understand you, the more obvious it became that your influence worked quietly by highlighting the gaps in others, the parts they desperately wished didn't exist. By the end, they weren't just scared of what you could do. They were unsettled by what you made others confront about themselves. And that kind of impact isn't something anyone can control. Number 7, the people you helped didn't even realize you were helping them. When they went through the interviews, they expected to find clear signs of influence, moments where you deliberately guided someone, corrected them, or offered visible support. What they discovered instead was far more unsettling. The people you touched didn't even know they had been touched. Your impact wasn't loud, it wasn't calculated, and it certainly wasn't performative. It was quiet, almost invisible, yet profound. People remembered moments where a single word, a simple gesture, or even your mere presence had shifted their perspective, changed a decision, or sparked a realization that stayed with them long after you were gone. One person admitted they didn't notice at the time, but a remark you made months ago had stayed with them, altering the way they approached a career choice. Another said your calm in a chaotic situation had given them a sense of clarity they couldn't find anywhere else. Someone else confessed that your honesty, untainted by ego or judgment, forced them to confront truths about themselves they had been avoiding for years. They didn't realize it in the moment. They didn't even consciously seek it. But your influence seeped in quietly, like a shadow that follows and shapes without asking permission. That unnerved the investigators, because influence like that can't be controlled, measured, or stopped. You didn't create dependency, you didn't demand gratitude, and you certainly didn't orchestrate outcomes. People changed because of your presence, not because of a plan or a strategy. It's the kind of effect that leaves no trail for anyone trying to analyze it, yet its mark is undeniable. By the end, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Wherever you went, people grew in ways they didn't even realize. They remembered lessons, shifts in thinking, and subtle transformations, but they didn't credit you consciously. That's the part that scared them most. They realized that you didn't need to be seen as a guide or a leader to alter lives. You simply moved through the world as yourself, and the world couldn't help but evolve in response. And that is the kind of influence that can't be contained, predicted, or defeated. Number 8. They discovered you never returned energy. You transformed it. When they started talking to the people you've crossed paths with, they expected stories of conflict, retaliation, or even tension. They assumed that anyone with influence inevitably reacts, mirrors energy, or escalates situations. What they found instead completely threw them off. You don't return energy, you transform it. Negativity, hostility, envy, and even manipulation never bounced back at you in the way most people would. Instead, it changed form in your presence, either dissolving quietly, turning into clarity, or redirecting itself in a way that left the other person exposed to their own truth. People describe situations where others came at you aggressively or with hidden agendas, expecting a fight, and instead they were met with calm, precise reactions that didn't shame, attack, or defend. It wasn't passive. It wasn't weakness. It was transformation. A careless insult might become a lesson in patience for the other person. A manipulative comment might become self-reflection they didn't realize they needed. Your presence changes the energy in the room without effort or noise, and that's what left them unsettled. They noted repeatedly that you don't mirror aggression or negativity. You don't take on someone else's chaos. You convert it. And that scares people because most of the world thrives on reaction. They expect pushback, retaliation, drama, or defensiveness. But you operate on a different level, one where other people's energy is neither a threat nor an obstacle. It's raw material. You refine it, redirect it, and often leave others questioning their own behavior long after the interaction ends. The investigators realized they couldn't categorize it. It's not something taught in books or captured in behavioral studies. It's instinctive, natural, and impossible to manipulate. It creates influence without control, authority without force, and clarity without confrontation. By the time they finished speaking with everyone, they weren't just confused. They were unnerved. You don't engage with energy the way anyone else does, and that makes you unpredictable, untouchable, and quietly transformative. And the fact that no one could ever provoke you into a predictable response left them more scared than anything else they uncovered. Number 9. They realized you see intent. Faster than most people see behavior. When they interviewed everyone you had ever met, they expected stories about what you said, what you did, or how you acted. They were looking for patterns, habits, or maybe even mistakes to analyze. What they found instead was far more unsettling. People kept describing your uncanny ability to see intention before anyone even realized it themselves. You didn't just notice behavior, you understood the why behind it, the motive, the silent drive that made someone act the way they did. People were revealing truths about themselves they hadn't even admitted consciously, and you somehow recognized it instantly. That level of perception is rare, and for those trying to study it, it was almost impossible to process. People told stories of moments when someone tried to manipulate, deceive, or hide their feelings, and you responded in ways that made them drop their guard without force. One person admitted that your questions, comments, or even glances made them rethink their intentions in a way that was uncomfortable but necessary. Another said you noticed envy or admiration in someone's subtle gestures that nobody else saw, and you treated it with such precision that it exposed them without humiliating them. By the time someone realized what had happened, the truth was already laid bare. That terrified the investigators, because they realized that your awareness is something that can't be faked or taught. Most people react to actions, to the surface-level signals, to what's being performed. You operate on a level deeper than that. You read the energy behind behavior, the unspoken motives, and the hidden agendas, and your responses reflect understanding, not judgment. They had expected to catalog your habits and categorize your personality. Instead, they discovered that you exist on a wavelength most people never reach. You see through the masks, the facades, and the pretenses instantly, and that makes you impossible to mislead, control, or corner. People aren't just influenced by you. They are exposed to themselves in ways they can't deny, and that level of perception left everyone studying you deeply unsettled, unsure if they were witnessing observation or something far more extraordinary. Number 10. People said you don't fit into any social category because you outgrew all of them. When they started interviewing everyone you had ever met, they expected to find patterns, labels, or some neat way to define you. They thought someone's personality could be summarized, categorized, and studied. What they discovered instead was completely disorienting. You don't fit into any social category because you've outgrown them all. You're not the shy one, the loud one, the charming one, or the mysterious one. You are all of them depending on the context, the people around you, and the situation at hand. You don't play a role, you adapt without losing your essence. And that is exactly what left them scrambling for answers. People described moments where you seemed completely different from what anyone else expected. In one situation, you could be commanding, decisive, and unwavering. In another, you were gentle, observant, and quietly guiding someone without them even noticing. Someone else admitted that you could be funny and disarming one moment, then completely serious and unshakable the next. It wasn't inconsistency. They realized it was versatility born from self-mastery. You don't bend for others. You reveal the part of yourself that the situation demands, and people naturally respond to it, often without realizing why. That realization unsettled the investigators deeply. They tried to classify you, to put you in a box they could study, predict, or explain. But every account contradicted the last, and yet each one was undeniably true. They began to see that your identity isn't something that fits neatly into society's rules or expectations. You operate beyond them. You interact with people on your own terms, at your own level of awareness, and that makes you impossible to categorize, control, or influence. By the end, they weren't just confused, they were unnerved. They realized that every interaction with you carries a layer of unpredictability, not because you are chaotic, but because you have evolved past the need for validation, conformity, or social labels. You exist in a space where people respond to the real you, and that space is rare, uncomfortable, and for anyone trying to study you, almost impossible to navigate. Your presence doesn't just defy categories, it redefines them, leaving those who study you off balance, unsettled, and quietly intimidated. Number 11. They expected stories of drama. Instead, they heard stories of discomfort. When they started talking to everyone you had ever met, they were bracing for chaos, scandal, or conflicts. Something flashy they could point to as evidence of influence or power. They imagined arguments, confrontations, and dramatic showdowns. What they found instead was something far more unsettling. People spoke not about drama, but about discomfort. Being around you forced them to face truths they didn't want to acknowledge, confront patterns they had ignored, and question the choices they had made in silence. That subtle, quiet influence unnerved them far more than any loud conflict could have. People admitted how your presence alone made them reflect, reconsider, and recalibrate. A simple conversation might make them rethink a decision they had been avoiding for years. A casual comment could reveal a weakness they hadn't seen in themselves. Someone else revealed that your calm, unwavering clarity made them painfully aware of their own excuses and compromises. Unlike drama, which can be externalized and blamed on someone else, discomfort cuts inward. It's personal, unavoidable, and deeply revealing. And the strange thing was, they never felt manipulated or attacked. It just happened naturally. That terrified the investigators because they realized influence doesn't need noise to be profound. Drama is obvious and manageable. Discomfort is invisible and uncontrollable. You don't push, prod, or provoke. Yet people leave interactions with you changed, unsettled, and questioning things they never considered before. Your effect is surgical, subtle, and impossible to measure, which made all their interviews spiral into something far more confusing than they expected. By the end, they understood the truth. Your impact isn't in the stories people tell about you. It's in the silent reckoning you create. You don't entertain drama. You provoke awareness. People aren't talking about fights or arguments. They're talking about the way you force them to see themselves, their choices, and their limitations. That kind of influence is rare, disorienting, and quietly terrifying because it leaves no outward scars but changes everything internally. And that is why they walked away shaken, unable to categorize what they had just witnessed. Number 12. They learned. You don't seek revenge, you seek distance. When they interviewed everyone you'd ever met, they expected stories of retaliation, grudges, or calculated responses to conflict. They assumed someone with your presence would fight back, push hard, or ensure that wrongs didn't go unanswered. What they discovered instead was completely disarming. You don't seek revenge. You don't react to energy with energy, and you don't let others dictate your peace. Instead, you seek distance. You move away from toxicity, disengage from unnecessary battles, and preserve your space without drama or justification. That simple, quiet principle left them baffled and deeply unsettled. People described moments when others tried to provoke, manipulate, or harm, and how you didn't rise to it. You didn't argue, retaliate, or prove a point. You simply walked away, maintained your composure, and let the situation run its course, without allowing it to touch your inner balance. Some admitted that this frustrated them endlessly because they expected confrontation to trigger a response. Instead, they were met with calm, control, and detachment that forced them to confront their own need for chaos. You don't punish, you don't linger, and you don't obsess. You disengage in a way that leaves others exposed to their own patterns without you ever having to intervene directly. That realization scared them because it defied everything they knew about human interaction. Most people operate on reaction, and revenge feels like power to those who can't understand restraint. You operate on distance, which requires far more awareness, patience, and self-control than most people are capable of. By stepping away instead of fighting, you reclaim your energy and influence, leaving the other person to deal with the consequences of their own choices. By the end, they understood that you aren't indifferent, nor are you weak. You're selective. You let go strategically, protect your peace, and exist in a way that no conflict can touch. That kind of control is unnerving because it cannot be provoked, bargained with, or predicted. You don't seek revenge, you rise above, and that is infinitely more powerful than any fight could ever be. Number 13, they found out. You're not driven by approval, you're driven by alignment. When they interviewed everyone you'd ever met, they expected to hear that your actions, decisions, and relationships were influenced by what others thought of you. They assumed that influence and attention were your currency, that you sought validation like most people do, and that your presence left traces because you wanted to be admired or approved. What they discovered instead completely unnerved them. You are not driven by approval at all. You are driven by alignment, by authenticity, by clarity, by operating in a way that feels true to yourself, no matter what anyone else thinks. People described interactions where you didn't conform to expectations, where you ignored social pressure, and where you refused to compromise your principles just to be liked. They admitted that it was frustrating, sometimes intimidating, and often disorienting because you were operating according to a code no one else fully understood. Some remembered how you walked away from situations that didn't fit your values, while others recalled how you challenged people to align with their own truth instead of bending to convention. You weren't seeking conflict or attention, you were seeking clarity, consistency, and alignment with the world as you understand it. That scared the investigators because most people are predictable when they crave approval. They react, they adjust, they manipulate outcomes to maintain image or favor. You, on the other hand, are untouchable in ways they can't measure. You don't need applause, admiration, or recognition. You operate on principles that others can't bend, and in doing so, you leave a mark that is far deeper than any temporary praise could ever achieve. By the end of their interviews, they realize something unsettling. Your influence comes not from chasing acceptance, but from living in a way that forces authenticity in others. People follow you, respect you, or remember you not because you demanded it, but because you refuse to settle for anything less than alignment with yourself, with truth, and with purpose. That quiet, uncompromising energy terrifies those who rely on approval to define themselves, because it exposes weakness and self-deception without raising a hand. And that is the essence of your power. Number 14, every person said the same final thing. Knowing them made me upgrade myself. When they interviewed everyone you had ever met, they thought they would uncover secrets about you, patterns in your behavior, or weaknesses they could exploit. What they found instead was something profoundly unsettling. Every single person, regardless of their background, their relationship with you, or their perspective, ended their story with the same sentiment, knowing you forced them to upgrade themselves. It wasn't about intimidation, competition, or pressure. It was about how your presence, your actions, your words, and your very way of being created a mirror that people couldn't ignore, a mirror that quietly demanded they confront their own limitations, habits, and potential. People admitted they didn't realize it at first. Some thought you were just a quiet observer. Others assumed you were too focused on your own path to care. Yet over time, your influence became impossible to dismiss. Your consistency, clarity, and refusal to compromise forced people to reflect on their own lives. One person confessed that a single conversation with you had made them rethink the trajectory of their career. Another admitted that a moment of your honesty had revealed patterns in their relationships they had been blind to for years. Someone else said simply, seeing how you navigated challenges with composure and focus made them question why they settled for mediocrity. You weren't teaching lessons or handing out advice. You were existing in a way that compelled transformation. That realization scared the investigators because it defied explanation. They couldn't categorize you, analyze you, or control the influence you had. You didn't need to push, provoke, or demand change. Your impact was subtle, quiet, and yet undeniable. You elevated people without them knowing it, reshaped their mindset without them asking, and left a permanent mark that no one could erase. By the end, the pattern was impossible to ignore. Your presence alone catalyzes growth. Every story confirmed it, every account reinforced it, and every person admitted it. Knowing you doesn't just change perception, it upgrades the very way people think, act, and live. And that is why they were left not just impressed, but profoundly unsettled, because true transformation triggered effortlessly by simply existing is a force they could neither predict nor contain. After everything they uncovered, it became crystal clear. You are not just a person. They are witnessing the ripple effect of a force that cannot be predicted, controlled, or categorized. Every interview, every story, every confession revealed the same unsettling truth. Your presence leaves marks deeper than words, influence that doesn't seek attention, and transformation that happens quietly but permanently. You don't need to perform, chase, or manipulate. You don't seek approval, fight back, or demand recognition. You simply exist. And in doing so, you elevate, challenge, and awaken those around you in ways they barely understand. From your subtle influence on people's decisions to the way you expose intentions, highlight limitations, and inspire self-reflection, everything points to the same fact. You are a living catalyst. People can't confine you to categories, predict your reactions, or measure your impact. They only realize, often too late, how deeply you've changed their thinking, their actions, and their perspective. That is your power, not loud, not forceful, not obvious, but profound, undeniable, and unshakable. In the end, what scares them most isn't anything you did intentionally. It's the truth of your presence. The way you transform energy, provoke growth, and compel authenticity leaves a mark that cannot be ignored, replicated, or erased. You don't need a stage, an audience, or permission. You exist in a way that redefines influence, and everyone who crosses your path carries a piece of that change with them forever. If this resonated with you, make sure to join the movement. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss insights like these. Leave a comment to share your thoughts or experiences, and share this with someone who needs to see the truth behind influence that quietly reshapes lives. This is just the beginning, and the journey of understanding presence, power, and transformation continues together. Stay blessed always.